or good morning, depending on where you are, and thank you for joining us. My name is Matthew Crabb. I'm the CEO of QA Financial, and we're very pleased to present this webinar in partnership with Perfecto, the test automation specialist. And the topic today is delivering the ultimate in mobile UX. And we have some great guests and a great expert speaker who from Perfecto, Aaron Kinsborough, who is Perfecto's chief evangelist, who's going to share a presentation, 10 slides or so, that covers this challenge. And we also have from Aviva, Chris Thompson, who's global head of mobile and public websites at the insurance company. And then from Tide, which is a UK-based business banking platform, a disruptor. We have Yorgos Ompavis, who is head of mobile there, head of mobile and web at Tide. And Aaron is going to introduce those two guests a little more fully and ask them a couple of questions in a minute before his presentation. So the ultimate in mobile UX, it's a challenge, of course, that's very sharply in focus with the current lockdown. There are unprecedented demands on mobile and web teams to respond to changing patterns of customer demand. But we're also looking longer term. We're looking at the impact of the rollout of 5G and the increasing connectedness of our world, smart cities, smart devices, big data. And we're going to try and anticipate what customers are going to be looking for in terms of UX, in terms of financial services, in regulated markets in particular. And we're going to hear from our guests on what they see their own customers demanding and what they're preparing for. This webinar is going to last about 40 minutes, including the presentation, that discussion, and there will be the opportunity for you to send in your questions. At the bottom of your screen, you can see a Q&A button. If you want to ask a question, just please write it there and we'll get round to it, I promise, in 20 minutes or so. And the webinar as a whole will last around 40 minutes. So that said, I'll hand over to you, Aaron, to start the discussion.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, QA Financial, for hosting the webinar and inviting us together with Chris and Yorgos. Before I start, moving into the question, maybe Chris and Yorgos, each and every one of you can say a few words about your role within each organization, starting with you, Chris, at Aviva.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me here. So yeah, I look after all of our mobile output, particularly our mobile apps. And that's a mixture of both in-house built apps and also some third-party apps that we white label and use. And then our public website, so .co.uk.com, and some of our other sites for our investors and shareholders as well. So yeah, it's a huge remit. It's obviously Aviva's a global company, and we have a lot of output, and equally quite a high number of customers that we are servicing.
Thank you, Chris. Yorgos, can you say a few words about your role at Tide?
Yeah, thank you from my side for inviting me here. So I am the VP of Engineering for the whole London Tech Center, but also the Director for the Client Engineering globally. So we have 3 offices as well, one in Sofia and one also in India, Hyderabad. And I'm overlooking all the operations for the client engineering, hiring, but also strategy and delivery as well.
Excellent. Thank you for being with us. With that, let's just dive into a few questions that kind of tie back into the title of this webinar, ensuring high UX for digital applications. And the first question is just an intro to understand where each and every one of you is in the maturity towards DevOps, CI/CD. Maybe starting with you, Chris, can you just put yourself in the maturity model, where you are today, and what's holding you back, if any?
Yeah, I would say, particularly with mobile, we are towards the top end of intermediate, not quite advanced yet, we have made a dramatic move towards that over the last 12 months, and we're working towards creating a better CD approach. I think the thing that's holding us back mostly is things that are out of our control to an extent. So obviously with the insurance industry is quite tightly regulated and controlled. So new features that we want to launch are often subject to security checks or pen testing that doesn't fit in with our sprint cycle. So as much as we can release as rapidly as possible, and we've moved from, I think, 3 releases in 2018 to around about 17 in 2019, and we're looking towards 2 or 3 a month now to fitting our sprint cycles. We still have that challenge of pen tests and security checks. Often, don't want to use the phrase "get in the way" because they need to be done, but they're often hinder what we're trying to do.
Awesome, excellent. And Yorgos, where you are on your journey towards this continuous delivery?
So, I'm very tempted to say advanced, because we have a really stable release cycle. Every 2 weeks, we probably release, excluding hot fixes, we released probably more than 25 last year. So we are doing really well there. We are very stable. However, this is not. We want to move. We want to decrease that time. So our CI/CD pipelines, especially on mobile, are really stable. We are using, of course, a third party. They're really stable and really advanced. What's stopping us getting even better to the expert level is probably automation, where we are lacking a bit. We are relying heavily on manual regression. That's where we probably, that's why we are investing a bit more in 2020, quite a bit more. And the aim is actually to go into weekly releases at some point. Having said that, this is general releases. But our pipelines need to be able to support daily releases on multiple canary channels for closed, for actual members in production, but closed and controlled environment.
Thank you, Yorgos. Before I move to the next question, Yorgos, can you just give an example of, you're saying that there are a few manual test cases that you want to automate. Are there technology challenges to automate them, or it's just a time constraints to automate them?
So we have some technical constraints. So there are code that needs to be made testable, of course, before you actually test it. We have quite a few product debt that we need to sort out. Also, there's lots of immaturity in the team as well in terms of automation. So this is where we're investing as well. We don't invest only in tools. We invest also in training and strategy. It's really important to have a clearly defined testing strategy and unified across the organization. Back and front end, even product team, they need to be on the same page. What is the testing pyramid and how you move forward, because everybody's affected by it. And this is where we're actually investing now.
Excellent. And I think that's, Yorgos, a nice segue to the next slide. You were mentioning the test pyramid and talking about the test automation challenges. Based on the research that I have been actually actively involved in, we have seen that, the average test automation success is about 50%. You are saying that it's still an issue for you as well. Are you able to balance between the different layers of the test pyramid, starting again with you, Yorgos, because it's part of the previous question?
So for us, the testing pyramid includes a bit more steps. So we've actually, we've gone and defined even few extra things. The thing is, what's the weight of each one? And I know some companies, they invest heavily on UI testing. We're not investing heavily on UI testing. On the contrary, we're investing heavily on unit testing. Having a really good unit test, doesn't really mean that your code is not tested. UI tests, on the other hand, they're cumbersome, they're flaky, difficult to maintain. So we do want to keep it this layer very thin. Now, then that's the problem, is having the balance. What's the balance between the three? Depends how many levels you have. Find the balance between them. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point, Yorgos. Chris, what's your take about that? Are you also struggling today with automation? And why, if you are struggling, why is that the case?
So our focus is really on the API layer testing, because Aviva is, given its age, it's a 220-year-old company. And along the way, we've adopted other companies and other systems that we still use today. So there are a huge amount of API calls that we have to deal with, and a complex variety of customer types and policy types and product types. So our heavy reliance is on that API layer. So we do have automation tools in there, and that's the area we focus on. There will still always be a need for some manual testing there because of the complexities that we have. And the same, we have a good amount of unit testing, and we focused a lot of energy there. UI testing does happen, but it tends to be more of a manual process, just because the tools that we've looked at have often been in their infancy and don't necessarily do a very good job of the UI for us. But it's absolutely in that API layer test. We have specific targets that we want to meet, particularly around login access and reducing those times. We've started to see sub 2-second logins. And that sounds like a long time, but when you're calling 10 to 15 systems through different API layers, that's quite a challenge anyway. So we rely on those tools to make sure that we're doing that all the time.
Awesome. So I think that's a nice transition to, I've prepared a nice summary slide that I've been hearing over the past, I'd say, few months, especially after conducting this research and survey. And I think I've captured from you guys, Chris and Yorgos, you were talking about skill set that you constantly are investing in to have the ability to overcome technical challenges. You're talking about some legacy and some other constraints that you have within your architecture and environment. I've seen some additional challenges in test automation that are holding back organizations from maturing test automation to a higher degree. Things such as either testing is done separately or, testing teams are just waiting too long in the cycle to get the binaries, to get the access to the build so they can start testing. And when I'm saying start testing, it's not just execution, but it's also creating new test cases. So there is a very short amount of time for them to invest in new test cases, not even talking about maintaining old ones. We're talking about setting up a lot of test environments, especially, you guys at Aviva and TAD, I'm sure that you have different environments, staging, pre-production, production that you want to have constantly up to date when you are launching your test automation, whether they are on the unit level, the API, or also the UI. And lastly, I've been hearing things around design for testability. So the ability to actually even invest in test automation from a feasibility standpoint. Any comments, maybe starting with you, Chris, on these challenges? Do you see something that is missing here, or do you agree that these are like real pains?
Yeah, I think they are real pains. For us, obviously, we still develop a lot of new features, and so we have to write those tests or automate those test scripts at the point where those things go in from backlog into our sprint cycle. But we are still quite heavily reliant on a manual regression test, although we do some automation around regression, but it's very much a manual role, really. So yeah, I think these are all pain points, and we do see a need to accelerate some of the unit tests and the at point of development testing. But it's often a case of we don't really know what's coming until it happens or it comes into sprint. So there's a reliance on testers to write those scripts as part of the story creation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yorgos, any comments on this slide?
No, I mean, I can identify almost all of them. For me, I'm not sure if probably is included here, is also the how well are your stories written, right? This is also like we use BDD now. This is not very common for companies doing BDD scenarios. The BDD scenario is something that helps you find these issues much earlier. Of course, you're still going to have issues going down the path, but much less. Other techniques like TDD, doing TDD probably helps as well. But having good testing doesn't require you to do TDD. It's all about how you test, I guess. And also it's a mindset, which probably is an umbrella of everything here. It's your engineers need to feel that testing is part of the job. And that's the main issue. That's the main problem I've seen like in my 15 years career. I've seen it quite often. Engineers don't really like testing. I'm including myself when I was a software engineer. I don't enjoy testing, but there's a point where you need to realize that this is part of your job. You need to eat your own dog food. You need to experience the issues. What we have is actually people developing something and then throw it away to some other team, maybe even in another location, to actually do the testing. And that's where the problems are. There's no, it's separated. Actually, this is already here. That's the main issue for me. Mindset.
Just to echo that, we retain our test teams in a co-located environment. Not at the moment, obviously, but our teams are together, and BDD has become a real factor in what we do, because seeing that percentage of success even at the end of a sprint is actually encouraging for the developers as well. So it has not only does it allow us to do things more quickly, but it actually puts a bit more confidence into the code and for the dev team.
I couldn't agree more with that, guys. I think that BDD is kind of an enabler or a facilitator for a shared responsibility, like an end-to-end. So you write the user story in Gherkin, you have all the scenarios very well defined, and then you do the testing, but you also rely on the test engineers to write some of the step definitions, and then you have the fast feedback. So I think BDD is a very good approach for employing a shared responsibility around quality, especially in cases where engineering doesn't like to do any testing. So I think that that's a great approach. So we talked about the importance of different testing types. You talked about the test pyramid in the previous slides, but let's try to approach the test pyramid from the ongoing stuff. We're talking about continuous delivery. We're talking about continuous testing. So how do you maintain as an ongoing process within your organization all of your test artifacts, whether they are API, unit, or UI testing? And I know that UI testing is harder to maintain over time, but let's start with you, maybe, Chris. Do you have like a established process to maintain your test artifacts over time?
Yes, yes, we do. I think we have to remind ourselves to do it, but it's about reviewing it regularly and reviewing what those test cases are, and almost a test the test process, in that we need to validate that those things are still relevant. We don't tend to change much of our core code, but we do add to it, and that has an effect on some of the stuff that we have already built. So it's a rigorous process around making sure that our test scripts are up to date, and they still reflect the end-to-end regression as well, so that we don't miss things like that.
Awesome. And Yorgos, you said that you have a very good, solid CI/CD pipeline. From a maintenance perspective, if you can also address, how do you maintain your testing, the test automation that you have as an ongoing process, but also how are you keeping your CI/CD kind of clean of noise? And noise can be flaky test cases, talking about the UI stuff and others, or simply irrelevant test cases that are starting to invade your CI/CD activities.
So I'll start from the bottom. Okay, unit tests, they are part of the definition of done. So there's not going to be an approval in any PR, any pull request that if it's not covered by unit tests. They are part of the CI/CD pipeline. they're not that flaky. Unit tests are very stable. Occasionally we have the test failing because probably around time zones and timestamps. Maybe some small issue with the tool that we're using now. But they're very stable. UI tests, on the other hand, it's not built in our pipeline, CI/CD pipeline, because they are intensive, obviously, and they need quite a lot of time. I think we run them nightly now, if I'm correct, automatically, but not as part of our delivery pipeline. So noise. On UI tests, yes, we have lots of noise. I'm not sure the tool is the best tool that we're using, to be honest. I don't want to name it, obviously, but it's not. I don't think it's the best one. We don't use native UI tests, which I'm very fan of, but we're looking into it. As we speak now, this quarter, we're focusing on that layer as well. But like
Awesome.
I said, this is going to be a very thin layer for us. So we're not investing heavily. We're not planning to have 100% coverage of the app with UI test. We will cover only the basic paths, the very basic paths, and basically they will only give us some confidence. So that's why they're at the other top of the pyramid. It's not the ones that we're heavily relying on. Actually, like Chris said, probably the API tests, and we have other type of tests like component testing, but also contract testing. That's the ones that are going to give us much more confidence, and they're in the middle.
Makes total sense. So you mentioned the word coverage, which is a topic that is close to my heart. So especially, and this webinar is about mobile. Do you feel that, starting with you, Yorgos, now, do you feel that your team is now on top of both, iOS and Android from a coverage standpoint perspective? We have so many different permutations of mobile operating systems and devices. And I agree that you're testing, from the unit and the API layer, which is fine. But at the end of the day, these real smartphones, tablets with different screen resolutions, screen size, layouts, and now we are looking also at foldables and new features coming in Android 11. Do you feel that you are on top of the digital coverage, especially for the mobile piece?
So for Apple, it's much easier, obviously, much less devices, although they keep releasing new things now. For Android, it was always an issue. And that's where we are also investing in tools. We do want to have a farm of devices, if possible, actual devices, but even simulators or emulators for Android is still okay. So I wouldn't say we are on top of it, but we're looking into it anyway. So we do want to, we're lucky we don't support tablets yet. So we don't have that pain as well. So it's available for tablets, but it's not supported as in phone devices.
Okay, and you do not see any major escape defects on mobile based on coverage constraints?
So occasionally there is something, a device from China, which we don't even know, and that crashes. On iOS, it's much more straightforward. We do find issues with every time we have a release on OS. That's where we probably get some issues, some incompatibilities. On covered devices, I can't remember having like a major issue on iOS between devices because it's easy to cover, to be honest. And to be fair, it's the experience is much more. I mean, it's the same company releasing devices, so it's not like Android. Android is Android. You have every company trying to release, they're getting the OS, they're changing it, and they're releasing it, and and usually Samsung is the one that's causing us issues. Sorry.
Yeah. I see it as well. Chris, any comments on your end? How are you facing digital test coverage?
I mean, it's just the same as Georgios says. We tend to see fewer problems with iOS because we pretty much know what we're expecting. Again, with Android, there are a combination of devices and operating systems and that complexity is challenging. We will never be able to cover all of that, even through emulated testing, which we're only sort of looking at the moment. We're not really doing a great deal of. We quite a high number of devices, and we actually rely on customer feedback as well. So customers will quickly tell us if something doesn't work on one of the more obscure devices that we don't necessarily have the ability to test for. So yeah, it's frustrating, I guess, because we do have tablet coverage as well, so we have that added complexity. But as soon as we think we're on top of it, then a new device comes out or a new operating system version comes out, and then we're back to square one again, just testing around those things. So it's always moving, and it's very difficult to keep ahead of.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, one good practice. One thing we're doing now is actually we're trying to maintain the operating systems we support, and with that you exclude also devices, because it's impossible to try to maintain like a support 5, 6, even 7. Some companies they support up to iOS 8. This is impossible. And especially for fintech, for banking app, even for Aviva, I'll say security is really important. So you could potentially justify it under the security, umbrella. But this for security, we have to keep it very small. In this case, we exclude a lot of devices from the past.
Yeah, that is the same for us. So we make a point of only supporting 1 or 2 OSs below the most recent, particularly on iOS, but also on Android as well. And we will also we use our data around analytics to show which devices are being used. We do have some very obscure devices that we've got 1 or 2 users. We tend not to focus on that test for obvious reasons. If it's much more in the minority. But yeah, the reduction in OSs does mean that it removes a lot of devices as well from that test platform.
Yeah. I totally agree, guys, and I can tell you that from my experience with Perfecto, I've been producing what we call a test coverage index report for the past 6 or 7 years now. A new edition is coming next month, and I'm analyzing on an ongoing basis a lot of markets, obviously including the UK. So next month, I should be releasing a new version of the index that looks at not just analytics from the Perfecto cloud in different geographies, but also market research, what's coming to guide organizations like you on which platforms are more popular than others, to just help teams make more sense, filter this huge market into a reasonable size that you can include in your testing strategy. And I get the point that Yorgos made. You have the stock OS version, and then you have the Samsung and the others using custom OS versions that kind of disrupt a lot of the testing and the expected results as well. So yeah, you do want to have a good strategy around coverage across the board. With that, let's talk a bit about innovation, and maybe it's just me. Feel free to fight my observation here. But what I'm seeing when I'm typically going to the app stores and Google Play, I see most of the release notes over the past, I would say, year or so are minor bug fixes and performance improvements. Okay, I see it on mobile applications. I see it on even platform OS versions, the latest iOS, the latest Android beta version, even browser versions. Do you think that we are kind of in a slowdown from an innovation perspective on mobile applications, or are there too many escape defects to production that you still need to fight to make sure that you're keeping the lights on your mobile assets? But again, this is my observation. Would you agree? Starting with you, Chris.
I'm going to have to disagree. I think from Aviva's perspective, we are very innovative in our mobile environment. We've recently had 4 major updates to the MyAviva app, which is our core customer app. But over the last 18 months, we've released some pretty innovative apps, and we constantly update those things. So Aviva Drive, which is our telematics proposition, we have a digital GP app, and we've got wellbeing apps that are going out to both direct customers and our corporate customer market. So mobile is one area where we can innovate. We tend to know what our product base is as insurance products, and we innovate around those things. But also the opportunity we've got with mobile is to take those things forward and address it to a different audience, but also give that traditional audience a new way of engaging with us. So, for example, we've recently launched new tools within the MyAviva app to allow customers to get updates and information on not just policies, but also the world, and how COVID-19 is affecting them. So, it's allowing us to be a little bit more playful with customers as well, and test the appetite to engage more. I will caveat all of that with that. MyAviva, the app itself, was actually in its infancy a year ago. So we've also needed to do some of those things. But absolutely, the driver for me and my team is how can we improve, and the customer is at the forefront of that, and how we push out to them and give them more functionality to play with.
Awesome, Chris. I'm happy to hear that, and I love to be wrong, honestly, in this regards, because I do think that we are just in the beginning of a digital transformation, and there are so many things to improve. But obviously, quality drives innovation. If you do not have the base very stable, obviously you cannot innovate on top of that. What's your take on that, Yorgos?
I would probably disagree as well. Now, bug fixes is something that every release, I've never done a release, to be honest, that doesn't include bug fixes and performance enhancements. And actually, that's a very standard thing that never changes. In every app I've released, there was always that line, that bug fix and improvements, right? That's always there, because there's always somebody in your team that fixes something, and you need to mention it. Now, I wouldn't say that there's no innovation though as well, because innovation is not necessarily visible. So our members doesn't necessarily see it, but we still innovate on the background. We still do things that improve, like, we do things that we didn't do before, like especially with data science, like decisioning engines. We have quite a few stuff that users don't see. So we are being innovative, and I'm pretty sure quite a few companies, especially in a startup environment, they are trying to be innovative. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. So I don't see it as a problem. It's how do you display and what do you display. Also, don't forget that at Tide, this is a very normal thing. We do work on a very innovative feature, but at least for 1, maybe even 2 months in some cases, it's hidden behind a feature toggle. So we don't release it. It's not releasable, but we are working on it. Now, of course, you're not going to release a new feature every sprint, but I think our track record, for example, is very good. Like, we do release, I think we released 3 or 4 really good features in this year only, in this quarter, the first quarter. So I don't think companies are not innovative. Maybe they're not very vocal about it. They're not being very vocal about it. That's my opinion.
No, that's great, and I'm happy to talk with both of you and hear about innovation and ongoing releases with new value to customers. That's what we should be doing, as long as quality enables that. So I'm happy to see that this is not the case, especially for both of you in your organization. So this is great. So talking about innovation, and I think Matthew mentioned it in the beginning. We are now also at the edge of a few advancements that are either going to disrupt or just enable more functionality into existing applications in your segment, but also in others. I'm talking about the new wave of smartphones, the foldable devices. I'm talking about the widespread of 5G networks. I'm talking about progressive web applications, connected homes and cities. do you see at least a subset of these technologies as enablers for your future roadmaps or disruptors, both? Let's start with you, maybe, Chris. What do you think about some of these technologies, and are they part of your roadmap?
It's certainly stuff we're thinking about. Yeah, I mean, obviously the big one for us is things like driverless cars and automation there. And yeah, it's looking at how we address that and whether we look at an insure me type policy or proposition rather than insuring the actual vehicle, because obviously we don't know whether whose liability is it, the owner, is it the distributor, or is it the vehicle manufacturer. So it's really difficult to ascertain who's going to be insured at that point. So the insure me is probably the most common proposition that insurance companies are looking at. So, your home, your vehicle, your travel, your liability, all of those things are covered under one policy type. So those things we're also looking at. But I think one of the big things that I want to focus on personally is how we address the need or the change in insurance typing. So with IoT and 5G, that's also going to cause much more need for things like cyber security and cyber insurance. So let's say a factory has an automation production line. If that automation production line goes down because of a DDoS attack, then should we as insurers treat that as the same as a fire or a theft, in that it's a business impact, and how do we create policies that work for businesses in that way? So we're obviously looking at things like that within the business, but unfortunately the current situation in the world has also made us pause and take a step back and think about, actually the world is changing, and the way we work today and the way we operate. So business liability insurance, and people are working from home. We're seeing people driving less. So I think policies or products are changing constantly at the moment, and they will continue to change as we roll out those new technologies.
Excellent. Yorgos, any comment from you on the innovation path and how it impacts your future business?
So 5G, I think it will impact everyone, and not necessarily our business only. There will be changes on user interfaces, obviously. Connectivity is one of them, how we connect with devices, what type of devices. So I'll probably say that mobile applications, I'm not sure what the future is, but it's not, there is a serious competition coming. And with Internet of Things, we need to be very careful as well. It's very easy to say that, yeah, we could have a richer experience, but then the security, like Chris said, is going to be, the risk for losing security is going to be higher. So be very careful how you address, especially if you are a banking app. Like, it's very easy to, connecting with Alexa and getting your balance on the account through Alexa, it's fine. Probably you can do it very easily, but is it actually a good idea? I'm not sure. Like, do I need somebody else to listen to my balance over Alexa? Probably not. How secure is Alexa? I don't know. So with 5G, all this will come into play now. But for sure, the experience is going to be for the user. It will be much better.
I totally agree.
You talk about.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you talk about user interface as well. I think there will be, in time, quite dramatic changes in that UI as well. If we look back to the introduction of the iPhone, it was such a revelation, and that's only a few years ago, really, 10 years ago, to have that kind of interface where it was touch control. 5G will allow us to do things which are much more graphically intense and processing intense as well. So whether that's through AI or through assisted reality and virtual reality, I think the interface will change as well, which will have a massive impact on how we test for those things.
100% in agreement here, and I think you touched a lot of the points. Different UIs, different engagement methods, connectivity across different devices, with UI, without UI, like Alexa. I definitely think that security is going to be top of mind, especially in the financial verticals with these new disruptors in the industry. So very good stuff. With that, Matthew, these were the top questions that I had. I wanted to move to the final Q&A session and giving back to you, Matt. But before that, again, thanks Chris and Yorgos for joining and participating in this webinar.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Chris, Yorgos. We've got a few questions, so and 10 minutes or so to discuss them. So I won't give the names and the firms out because we haven't got permission to do that. But Rodolfo, from our audience, he asked this really early on in the session, Aaron. Can we be more explicit about what a test strategy is? So what is a test strategy now? And Chris and Yorgos were talking about lots of practical solutions, but do you have what you would call a test strategy? So should we start with you on that, Aaron?
Sure. So actually, I've written 2 books just about testing strategies. So it's a short question with a long answer. So I'll try to be as quick as possible. It obviously depends which application you're going to test, but a test strategy at the end of the day needs to be, especially in an agile environment, needs to focus on obviously the end user expectations. You're delivering value continuously to an end user. So your test strategy must adhere to your end user expectations. We talked about BDD earlier. So behavior-driven development is one approach to building a full-blown test strategy around it because it covers so many things. It breaks down the entire product into user stories. It breaks down user experience. It breaks down functionality, business cases, and many more. And it's very easily maintained over time. If a user story is added or changed, it's very easy for you to go back to the BDD stuff and fix it. So there are tools and methodologies, but also you want to think with your end user in mind when you are thinking about testing.
And Yorgos, so would you agree that the right benchmark for software and app quality, mobile app quality, is the improvement in user experience, and you can measure that by market share? I mean, is that what BDD means to you, and is what a test strategy means to you?
Sorry, I don't understand. No, definitely not measurable market share. Like market share, I don't think has anything to do because you can buy users. To be honest, it's not definitely it's not that. Testing strategy is all about delivering value and quality. For me, is knowing you having the confidence that what you deliver will actually you will provide the value to your members or users, whatever you want to call them. Now, how do you measure it? Obviously, there's ways to measure it. Value. On a mobile app, you have crashes, you have bugs, you have many things.
Okay, Chris, the same questions to you. And then one of the audience, somebody from one of the UK high street banks wanted to know what API layer testing tools you're using, Chris. So 2 questions. One about what a test strategy is and have you got one? And the other one about your API testing specifically.
Okay, so our test strategy is a result of our customer product delivery. So we look at what are the problems that customers have and how can we solve them for them. And whatever we create as that solution, our test strategy comes out of that. So are they able to do it? Are we solving the problem effectively? It's not just about does this thing work, it's does this thing work for the customer to solve the problem that they have. And that's more important from my perspective because we can build things, but if they're not useful, then actually what's the point? So that's how our strategies are born. It comes from a customer and a product strategy, really. On the API layer testing, so we've got a number of tools, but the main one that we use for monitoring and testing is App Dynamics. So that will allow us to see what's happening at that layer, and gives us the results that we can then feed back. So we can understand what we also need to improve on.
Okay, we had a question about whether you use simulators, local physical devices, or device clouds. I think we kind of covered that one in the conversation. It was something that we talked about, emulators. Perhaps we should pass by on that one. We had a question. Yeah, I mean, for both Chris and Yorgos, how confident are you with your apps? So I'm not quite sure how to interpret that, but what's, I guess, the level of robustness that you're aiming for? Particularly, perhaps I could ask a question about load testing, performance testing, where we're seeing big shifts in patterns of demand for different products during the lockdown. Perhaps we could put the question that way. Yorgos?
Let me take that.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, Chris, go.
So I think we'll never be 100%, or I'll never be 100% satisfied or confident in all of our apps, but particularly the MyViva app, which is our main focused customer app. We will never be able to do everything perfectly for all customers on all devices. And that, I think, as a product owner and a product evangelist, you have to start with that viewpoint. I'd love to strive for perfection, but understanding that it's so difficult to reach allows you that capacity to then go and build things that are useful. We get some great feedback on the app stores, and we get some very negative feedback. But the negative feedback is more around policy types and people being able to access certain policy types or product types. So we address those on a case-by-case basis. And again, it's not something we can always test for. And it comes back to this legacy of Viva being such a large and old company that we've got all these different customer cohorts and different customers, different product types. So I'm confident that we're doing the right thing. And I think our 4.6, 4.7 star rating reflects that, because I think we do the best thing for most customers. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll ever get, the 5-star target is so sought after. It's so difficult to achieve. But I'm confident that we're going the right way, and I'm very proud of what we've achieved in the last 12 months.
Okay, Yorgos.
I'm confident as well. So definitely we're not perfect. You can see the score. I mean, it's not a secret. It's on the Play Store. Our app, Android app, is lower than the iOS. The iOS is actually much higher. It's like Aviva 4.7. Now the problem is not. I mean, my problem is not being perfect though. We will never reach perfection. My aim is to actually improve, and having the right moving the needle every quarter. For me, that's a win, and we are doing that. We are becoming better. We are focusing, like I said, heavily on quality and automation and improving things. Every quarter we have OKRs. One of the objectives is around the platform as a whole, and we're doing things to improve our confidence. Now the question comes from one of my colleagues. That's surprisingly, he wants to put him in a difficult spot, but I will answer that. We are confident.
Okay. So another question, and you can see these, and this is from somebody working at one of the FX platforms, retail FX platforms. What method do your QA test teams use to gain complete confidence that the developers create sufficient unit tests to ensure fewer UI tests are needed for manual and automated testing? So I read that out, and you hadn't seen this question before. How would you respond to that one, Chris?
I don't think we really have a method for that. The point of my teams and having the right people in the teams is really about trust, and we expect those people to be writing the best test for the story, and so there is a level of trust on those teams to do the things. Are we going to get it right 100% of the time? Probably not. But actually, I think you've still got to put it back on your team to be able to do those things. The problem with manual tests is that it's always up for interpretation and it can fail. But you get the same thing with tools. It's only as good as the input. So you have to put the effort in and actually create the right kind of tests to have that success.
Okay, thank you. Yorgos?
I don't think we have a method as well, but we have guidelines, and we have specific guidelines. I mean, like I said, we always need it's a definition of done. It's included there. Now, the level of testing is probably subjective, I guess, on the person who's approving the PR, or the people who are approving the PR is more than one. We don't focus on, as a team, we don't focus on quantity, we focus on quality of test. We don't aim for 100% coverage, because you can still write 100%, you have 100% coverage, but the tests are meaningless. There are ways we're also looking into for the future, like going more functional, and with few functions, you eliminate, you become a bit better in unit testing, I guess. But it's not a method. It's just more like upskilling yourself.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Yorgos. Yeah. Great. We've had some great questions in. We've covered most of them, but we haven't had time to cover all of them. I wanted, Aaron, to come to you finally and ask a final question to you, if that's okay. You mentioned in your slide deck AI and the impact of AI and the utility of AI. Where are we on this curve of adoption of AI? What does it mean in terms of better UX right now? And where do you expect us to be 6 months, 12 months' time?
So that's a great question. I think that if you look at, if you divide web and mobile, AI for web is a bit more advanced and more easy. When you look at AI for testing mobile applications, we are in the beginning. I can tell you that, on the Appium community, there is already a draft project, if you like, that kind of enables scanning through different object locators, not by their property, but by their definition. So, for example, if you want to automate a purchasing flow, you can use a new custom command on Appium that leverages AI using the test.ai company to simply search for carts based on the description. So it's kind of a visual approach on top of native objects without really leveraging their element locators. And I think that going back to the previous questions on flakiness in the UI layer and things like that, AI is set, machine learning AI are set to fix the disruption of UI testing, especially on the mobile front, in the overall test automation. So test maintenance, test stability, and stuff like that on the UI layer can only, I guess, be fixed in the long run through machine learning algorithms. But to your point, it's quite early in the game right now to start, adopting these tools. But I can tell you that in the background, a lot of organizations are investing and looking into such solutions.
Okay. Aaron, thank you very much. Chris, Yorgos, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us. If you came in a little bit late, you can catch up with this webinar on demand, a recording on demand, which will be available through our QA Financial website. Again, thank you to Aaron and Perfecto for partnering with us on this webinar. It's been a great 50 minutes or so. We've covered a lot of ground, slightly longer than we planned, but we had some great questions as well. So thank you, everybody, and we'll leave it there until the next time. Have a good day.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Much.